It began with a press conference that nobody saw coming, yet everyone would remember. Sophie Cunningham, Lexie Hull, and Indiana Fever head coach Stephanie White stepped into the spotlight with faces that told a story before a single word was spoken. Fans had expected routine updates, perhaps a charity announcement or an upcoming team event. Instead, there was an air of dread, a heaviness that wrapped the room like a fog. Cameras clicked, microphones inched closer. This wasn't the usual pregame chatter. Something big, something unsettling, was about to be revealed, and it carried the weight of the WNBA's brightest star. For hours before the announcement, rumors rippled across social media. Group chats buzzed, sports talk shows speculated wildly, and insiders hinted that the league was bracing for news. The names attached to the event, Cunningham, Hull, and White, were enough to ignite speculation. Each represented resilience, leadership, and experience. But together, they formed a united front that had fans on edge. What could bring these three to the podium without warning? Whispers shifted to one name over and over, Caitlin Clark. And with that, the tension only grew. When they finally emerged, every step they took was deliberate, every glance exchanged brimming with unspoken meaning. The room went still, the kind of stillness that comes when everyone realizes they're about to witness history, though not the kind they'd hoped for. There was no smiling, no easy laughter, just an intense focus. Sophie stood firm, her eyes scanning the crowd. Lexie clasped her hands tightly. Stephanie White took a slow, steady breath. And then the first words fell heavy and undeniable. This is about Caitlin Clark. Rookie sensation, record breaker, the woman who had single-handedly redefined what a WNBA debut season could look like. She wasn't just an athlete, she was a phenomenon. She filled arenas to capacity, forced networks to rearrange their programming, and transformed casual spectators into devoted followers. But behind the highlight reels and the roaring crowds, there was another story, one the public had never been told, one that had been hidden behind her dazzling smile and electrifying plays. And in this moment, it was about to be exposed. From the moment she entered the league, Clark had been carrying more than a basketball. She carried expectations, crushing ones. Every game brought sold-out crowds, but also targeted defensive schemes meant to wear her down physically. Every interview brought praise, but also relentless scrutiny. Sophie, Lexie, and Stephanie weren't here to talk about wins and losses. They were here to reveal that the superstar everyone thought was unstoppable had been pushing herself to the brink. And it was time to tell the truth. Clark's rookie season wasn't just demanding, it was punishing. Night after night, she absorbed contact from the league's toughest offenders. The strategy was clear: stop Caitlin at all costs. But physical strain was only half the story. Mentally, the pressure was suffocating. She wasn't just a player, she was the face of women's basketball. Every move she made, every word she spoke was dissected by analysts, debated by fans, and turned into headlines. She was a phenomenon trapped under a magnifying glass, and the heat was unrelenting. Sophie Cunningham's voice cracked as she explained the reality. Caitlin's days blurred together. Practice, flights, games, interviews, repeat. There was no time to truly rest. Recovery became a luxury, not a necessity. Every city brought new challenges, both on and off the court. She had to play through exhaustion, navigate constant travel, and endure the physical toll of being a marked target. And through it all, she kept her smile because the world expected nothing less from its golden rookie. But the truth was that smile had been masking pain. Lexie Hull took her turn at the mic, her voice steady but her eyes betraying the emotion beneath. She spoke of how she'd noticed Caitlin's movements slowing after games, how she'd seen the subtle winces when Clark thought no one was watching. The team had tried to shield her, but the schedule and the spotlight left no room to hide. Caitlin's competitive fire wouldn't let her admit she was hurting. She played through it all, determined not to let down her teammates, her fans, or the league that had placed her on a pedestal. Stephanie White didn't mince words. She described the unrelenting grind. Commercial flights crammed with passengers, minimal recovery time, opponents tailoring entire strategies to shut Clark down. This league, White said, has to start taking better care of its players, especially the ones carrying the weight of its future. It was more than a statement. It was a challenge to the WNBA itself. Protecting stars like Caitlin wasn't just about winning games. It was about preserving the very fabric of the sport's future. Then came the moment that changed everything. After weeks of private discussions with coaches, trainers, and doctors, a decision had been made. Caitlin Clark's minutes would be cut. She would rest more, skip games when necessary, and focus on healing. For a competitor like Clark, it was agony. But for those who loved her, teammates, coaches, fans, it was a lifeline. This wasn't about one season. This was about ensuring she had a career worth remembering, one that wouldn't be cut short by relentless overwork. The announcement hit the basketball world like a thunderclap. The reigning WNBA Player of the Year, fresh off winning at the ESPYs, would not be playing the All-Star weekend she was set to headline. No three-point contest. No All-Star game. The dream stage that Indianapolis had been preparing for months would be missing its brightest light. The official explanation, an aggravated groin injury sustained during a brutal matchup against the Connecticut Sun. The unofficial truth, the grind had finally caught up with her. Clark's withdrawal wasn't just a headline. It was a turning point. Fans were stunned. Analysts scrambled to rewrite their predictions. Ticket holders were torn between disappointment and understanding. And yet, in a short message to fans, Caitlin made her priorities clear. Health came first. She promised to cheer from the sidelines, to support her team with the same passion she brought to the court. It was a kind of selfless decision that only deepened the respect her peers already had for her. But the absence of Caitlin Clark left a void that needed to be filled. That's when the spotlight shifted to Lexie Hull. Known for her deadly accuracy from beyond the arc, Hull had been quietly having one of her best seasons. Now, she was stepping into the biggest role of her career. But what fans didn't know was that Hull was playing through her own heartbreak. Just days earlier, she had lost a beloved dog, Maggie, her constant companion for 14 years. The grief was fresh, raw, and unrelenting. Hull's composure during this time was nothing short of extraordinary. While the basketball world celebrated her all-star call-up, she was privately mourning. She posted a heartfelt tribute to Maggie online, and among the hundreds of messages from fans, two stood out. One from Caitlin Clark, simply saying "love you," and another from Sophie Cunningham, offering her condolences. In the high-pressure world of professional sports, it's moments like these that remind us these athletes are human first, players second. If Sophie Cunningham was known for anything, it was loyalty. Earlier in the season, when Clark had taken a hard hit, it was Sophie who charged in to defend her. Consequences be damned. That act of protection earned her a fine from the league, but the unwavering admiration of fans. She was a kind of teammate who saw beyond the scoreboard, who understood that defending your team's heart mattered just as much as defending the basket. She wasn't just a player, she was a shield. Her loyalty extended beyond Caitlin. Sophie was also a pillar for Lexie, especially in the days after Maggie's passing. Whether it was a word of encouragement at practice or a quiet moment on the sidelines, she made sure Lexie never felt alone. This unspoken network of care between Sophie, Lexie, and Caitlin became the heartbeat of the Indiana Fever. Fans noticed and celebrated it. They even gave the trio a nickname, Tres Leches. Sweet, strong, and a perfect blend of flavors, just like their bond. Sophie embraced the nickname fully, even creating a custom shirt featuring cartoon versions of the three of them. It went viral instantly. Fans wore it to games, posted photos online, and turned the inside joke into a badge of pride. But it wasn't just about the shirt, it was about what it represented. In a league often defined by competition, this was a story about camaraderie. It was about three women who lifted each other up through victories, losses, and personal battles alike. Caitlin brought the flash. Sophie brought the fire. Lexie brought the focus. Together, they became the emotional anchor of the Fever, the glue that held the team together through the turbulence of a grueling season. Their bond wasn't manufactured in a PR meeting. It was forged in the grind of road trips, the quiet of late-night conversations, and the shared moment of vulnerability that only teammates can understand. But this wasn't just about friendship. It was about survival. The WNBA is as unforgiving as it is inspiring. And in a season where the spotlight never dimmed on Caitlin Clark, the presence of Sophie and Lexie wasn't just comforting, it was essential. They were the ones who made sure she didn't carry the weight alone. They were the ones who reminded her that even the brightest stars need time to rest, heal, and be human. That's why this announcement wasn't just another press conference. It was a warning shot to the league. The message was clear. If the WNBA wants to keep growing, it must protect its players. That means better travel accommodations, more recovery time, and an acknowledgement that the human body has limits. Caitlin Clark may be extraordinary, but she is not indestructible. And no player, no matter how great, should be expected to run on empty. The aftermath of the announcement rippled across the basketball world. Other players began speaking out, sharing their own stories of fatigue, injury, and mental strain. Coaches started rethinking rotation strategies. Even league officials began discussing potential changes. Caitlin's absence from the All-Star game may have been a disappointment, but also forced a necessary conversation, one that could reshape the future of women's basketball. In the days that followed, the Fever rallied. Without Clark on the court, roles shifted, and players stepped up in new ways. Lexie Hull's shooting caught fire. Sophie Cunningham's leadership became even more pronounced. And from the sidelines, Caitlin was still very much part of the game, cheering, coaching, encouraging. Her presence was a reminder that leadership isn't just about what you do on the court. It's about how you lift those around you. This is the legacy of Tres Leches. Not just the wins or the highlight reels, but the unbreakable bond between three women who turned personal trials into collective strength. They showed that in the WNBA, greatness isn't measured only in points or trophies, but in how fiercely you protect and uplift your team. And in doing so, they didn't just support Caitlin Clark. They set a new standard for what it means to be a teammate. The press conference may be over, but its message lingers. The crowd has dispersed. The microphones are packed away. But the words of Sophie Cunningham, Lexie Hull, and Stephanie White still echo. This was never just about one player. It was about a league at a crossroads, deciding whether it will prioritize spectacle or sustainability. And for the Indiana Fever, the choice was clear. Protect your own. Caitlin Clark's story this season will be remembered for her jaw-dropping performances, her meteoric rise, and her undeniable impact on the game. But it will also be remembered for this moment, the moment the game paused to take care of its brightest star. And in that pause, we saw something more powerful than any highlight. We saw heart. But while the press conference had set the tone, the real story unfolded in the quiet days that followed. Clark's absence wasn't just felt on the scoreboard. It rippled through the entire league. TV segments debated the decision, former players weighed in, and fans filled comment sections with both support and criticism. Some saw it as a necessary act of preservation, others as a sign that the WNBA was leaning too heavily on one player. Either way, the conversation refused to die down. It had touched a nerve far deeper than anyone expected. For Caitlin herself, stepping away was both a relief and a torment. She built her identity on competing, on being the one who could handle the weight, who could deliver when it mattered most. Now, she had to watch from the sidelines as her team fought without her. It was an exercise in humility and restraint, a test not of her skill, but of her patience. Every instinct screamed to get back on the floor, but the wiser voices around her reminded her this was a marathon, not a sprint. Sophie Cunningham became those wiser voices in human form. She was relentless in making sure Caitlin didn't push too soon. At practice, she'd keep her laughing. On game nights, she'd plant herself beside her, offering small observations about plays, pointing out moments of brilliance from teammates. She knew Caitlin needed to feel connected, even if she wasn't contributing physically. And in doing so, Sophie cemented her role as not just a protector, but a bridge, keeping Clark's spirit woven into the team's fabric. Lexie Hull, too, understood the importance of keeping that connection alive. She and Caitlin developed a silent communication during games, small hand signals, shared glances, ways of keeping her involved from the bench. For Lexie, this wasn't just about replacing Clark in the lineup. It was about honoring her. Every three-pointer she drained, every defensive stop she made, felt like a tribute. She was playing not just for herself, but for the teammate who the media tried to frame the story as one of loss, a superstar cut down in her prime moment. But within the Fever's locker room, it became a story of resilience. Players who had been overshadowed by Clark's brilliance suddenly had opportunities to shine. Role players stepped into starring roles. Bench players found themselves tested in high-pressure situations. And through it all, Caitlin remained the team's emotional center, proving that leadership doesn't vanish when you take off the jersey. Meanwhile, the Tres Leches nickname exploded in popularity. Fans began showing up in matching shirts, homemade signs, and even bakery-themed costumes. The bond between Caitlin, Sophie, and Lexie had become more than an inside joke. It was a movement, in a league constantly fighting for mainstream attention. This kind of organic, fan-driven energy was gold, and the Fever embraced it, understanding that the best branding was born out of authenticity. The WNBA, however, couldn't ignore the underlying message. Clark's situation was a case study in both the potential and the peril of building a league's momentum around a single star. She had brought unprecedented attention to the game, but she was also the clearest example of how that spotlight can burn too hot. League executives began quietly floating ideas for player protection protocols, more charter flights, expanded rosters, mandated rest periods. Nothing was official yet, but the shift in tone was unmistakable. For Sophie Cunningham, this was validation. She had long been vocal about the grind of the WNBA's schedule and the lack of infrastructure to protect its stars. But now, with Caitlin's injury front and center, her words carried more weight. She used her post-game interviews to push the conversation forward, never letting the topic fade. "If we want the game to grow," she said after one win, "we have to make sure our players can grow with it." It was a statement that resonated far beyond Indiana. Lexie Hull, too, found her voice in this moment, normally reserved in interviews. She spoke candidly about the emotional toll of balancing personal grief with professional expectations. "It's easy for people to see us as just athletes," she told reporters, "but we're people first. We carry our lives onto the court, whether we want or not. And that's why the support we give each other matters." Her words, quiet but piercing, struck a chord with fans and players alike. And Caitlin, she listened. She absorbed every game from the bench, like a student studying film for the biggest exam of her life. Her competitive drive hadn't dimmed. It had sharpened. If anything, the forced rest was feeding a hunger she'd never felt before. She promised herself that when she returned, it wouldn't just be as the same player. It would be as a smarter, stronger, more complete version of herself. And everyone who knew her believed it. The weeks stretched on, and the Fever adapted. They found new rhythms, new leaders, new heroes. But the presence of Caitlin Clark loomed large in every huddle, every timeout. She wasn't just recovering, she was leading from the shadows. And that's what made the eventual promise of her return so electric. When she stepped back on the court, it wouldn't just be another game. It would be the culmination of the story that had tested the limits of her body, her mind, and her heart. Off the court, the trio's friendship deepened even further. Nights after games were spent not in clubs or high-profile events, but in each other's company, sharing meals, watching movies, decompressing. These weren't headline moments, but they were the foundation on which everything else rested. And when you build that kind of foundation, no setback, not even the loss of your biggest star, can truly shake you. Fans who feel it, too. They sense the authenticity in every interaction, every Instagram post, every sideline moment caught on camera. This wasn't a PR stunt. This was a family. And that, more than any stat line or trophy, was what kept people coming back. They weren't just watching basketball. They were watching a bond unfold in real time, and they were invested in the outcome. By the time Caitlin's timeline for return began to solidify, the Fever had weathered the storm. They weren't unscathed, but they were unbroken. And in some ways, they were stronger. The minutes without their star had forced them to grow in ways they never would have otherwise. And when Clark finally did return, she was walking into a team that was more prepared, more confident, and more united than ever before. Her comeback was nothing short of cinematic. The crowd roared, cameras flashed, and the atmosphere felt like a playoff game. But the most telling moment wasn't a deep three or a flashy assist. It was when she turned to Sophie and Lexie after the opening tip, grinned and mouthed, "Let's go." It was a small thing, but in that moment, it was everything. It was the exhale after months of holding their breath. The Fever went on to close the season with a renewed sense of purpose. They weren't just playing to win, they were playing for each other. And that, as much as any strategy or roster move, became their competitive edge, the league had taken notice. Other teams began talking about building similar cultures, about prioritizing chemistry alongside talent. And in that sense, the impact of Tres Leches had gone far beyond Indiana. Looking back, it's easy to frame this as a story about injury and recovery, but that would miss the real point. This was a story about leadership in its truest form, about knowing when to fight through pain and when to step back, about teammates who refuse to let you carry the load alone, and about the kind of loyalty that can turn a group of professionals into a family. Caitlin Clark's all-star absence may have been the headline, but the legacy of this chapter will be something else entirely. It will be the way three women, each with their own strengths, struggles, and sacrifices, came together to protect not just a player, but a person. And in doing so, they showed the WNBA and the world what real team culture looks like. The league now faces a choice. Will it take the lesson from this season and invest in protecting its players? Or will it risk burning out its brightest stars before their time? The answer will shape not just the next few seasons, but the future of women's basketball itself. And whatever happens, one thing is certain: Tres Leches has already changed the game. And so the story comes full circle. What began as an unexpected press conference became a defining moment, not just for the Indiana Fever, but for the entire WNBA. It was a reminder that the game is more than stats and standings. It's about people. It's about the moments when we choose compassion over competition and care over clout. And for Caitlin Clark, Sophie Cunningham, and Lexie Hull, it's about a promise that no matter what comes next, they'll face it together.